A single mistap on a phone screen. That's all it took to tear my life down to the studs. Or maybe it was what finally gave me the blueprint to rebuild it. I'd called my father on a Tuesday afternoon about something utterly mundane, a leaky bathroom faucet and a question about its warranty. The call lasted maybe 3 minutes. He sounded like he always did. He sounded like a father. "I'll look for the paperwork, Clara," he'd said. "Talk to you in a bit." I waited for the decisive click of the call ending, but it never came. Instead, I heard a shuffle, the distinct clink of ice cubes hitting a glass, and then his voice, transformed. The warmth was gone, replaced by a chilling frost. "God, she is just draining," he sighed. "Always has been, a constant weight." My heart plunged into my stomach, and I stood paralyzed in my own kitchen. Every instinct told me to hang up, but I couldn't. Then, my mother's voice joined his. "Just keep it up, Robert. Lay on the guilt. She's soft. By the new year, that deed will be in our names. That house is our nest egg." They chuckled together. They were sipping wine and plotting to steal the very home my grandmother had left to me. The very home they were currently living in. I stared at the phone in my hand, but my hand wasn't trembling. A strange, cold calm washed over me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cut in. I just quietly ended the call. They saw me as a weight. They saw me as soft. But as I glanced around my beautiful living room, I knew exactly what my next move had to be. I was going to sell the house, and they weren't going to know a thing until it was far too late. Before we get into the details, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments, what city are you tuning in from? I was raised to believe my existence was an expense on a balance sheet. Some kids are brought up with bedtime stories and comforting hugs. I was brought up with an abacus. In our cramped little house just outside of Columbus, affection wasn't an emotion, it was a transaction. And in the eyes of my parents, Robert and Judith Evans, I was permanently in arrears. I was forever indebted to them. My first memories aren't of birthday parties or learning to ride a tricycle. They're of my father at our small kitchen table, clicking away at a calculator. The taps were always loud, deliberate. He'd look up at me, his gaze accusatory. "Do you have any idea what a kilowatt hour costs, Clara?" he'd ask. I was 7. I had no idea. All I knew was that leaving a light on was akin to picking his pocket. "It costs money to keep this house heated," my mother would chime in from the sink, her scrubbing of the dishes an aggressive percussion. "We break our backs so you can have a hot meal. You ought to be thankful we provide a roof over your head." Thankful. That was the mantra. It hung in the air of our home like a damp chill. I was to be thankful for the meals that were often lukewarm. I was to be thankful for clothes that were hand-me-downs from cousins I barely knew. I was to be thankful they didn't just abandon me on a church step. Every act of parental care came with a detailed invoice. I remember for my 11th birthday, I desperately wanted this one specific brand of fashion doll. Every girl in my class had one. I pleaded for weeks. On my birthday morning, a brightly wrapped box was waiting for me. My heart soared. I ripped it open, and there it was. My smile felt like it would split my face. "Thank you," I shouted. My father just took a slow sip of his coffee, not returning the smile. He pointed a stern finger at me. "That doll was $50, Clara. That's 5 hours of my time standing on a factory floor. I traded 5 hours of my life so you could have that thing. Don't you ever forget it." The joy vanished in an instant. I looked down at the doll. It wasn't a toy anymore. It was 5 hours of my father's suffering molded into plastic. I never really played with it. It sat on a shelf, a monument to my expense. and I was terrified I might damage their investment. That was the rhythm of my life. If they gave me a ride to a friend's house, the entire drive was a lecture on the price of gasoline. If I needed new sneakers for gym class, it meant they had to forgo their weekly steak dinner because of my feet. So, I learned to shrink myself. I learned to want for nothing. If you don't ask, you don't owe. I made it my mission to be invisible. But in a small house filled with resentment, you can never truly fade into the wallpaper. There was only one place I felt I could breathe, and that was my grandmother Eleanor's house. Eleanor was my father's mother, but she was cut from a completely different cloth. She lived about a half-hour's drive away, in a sprawling old Tudor with a beautiful wraparound porch. It was a huge house, far too big for one person, but she filled every corner of it with life. Her home smelled of jasmine and fresh-cut wood. She was always building or fixing something. She didn't believe in hiring handymen. "Come on, Claire," she'd say, the only person who ever shortened my name. "Grab that screwdriver. Right tool for the right job. Let the tool do the work, not your wrist." I spent every weekend I possibly could at Grandma Eleanor's. My parents were thrilled. It was one less plate to fill for 2 days. They'd drop me off on a Friday afternoon and peel out of the driveway. At Eleanor's, there was no ledger, there was no debt. She'd make these enormous Sunday dinners: roasted turkey, garlic mashed potatoes overflowing with butter, and string beans picked straight from her garden. We'd eat out on the porch in the summer twilight. "Eat up," she'd insist. "You're a growing girl. You need your energy." "Does this cost a lot?" I asked her once, eyeing a slice of turkey. She paused, and her eyes, which were usually so bright, turned sad and sharp. She reached over the table and put her hand over mine. Her skin was rough, calloused from years of gardening and woodworking. "Clara," she said, her voice firm, "food is meant to be eaten. A home is meant to be lived in. You never, ever have to apologize for the space you occupy. Do you understand me?" I nodded, even though I couldn't quite wrap my head around it. Not then. As the years went by, she taught me everything. She taught me how to refinish a hardwood floor until it shone like a mirror. She taught me how to patch a hole in drywall. She taught me how to prune rose bushes so they'd bloom bigger and brighter the next season. "A woman needs to know how to own her life," she told me once when I was 17, as we were restaining the deck. "If you know how to build it and you know how to fix it, nobody can ever take it from you." She also taught me about finances, but in a way that was the polar opposite of my parents. She didn't teach me to hoard it or to wield it like a weapon. She taught me to see it as a tool. "Save your money, Claire. Not to be wealthy, but to be free. Money is just freedom tickets." I took her words to heart. I got my first job at 16, bagging groceries. I babysat. I worked shifts at a local bookstore. I socked away every dollar. I didn't buy trendy clothes. I skipped the movies with friends. I saved. I wanted to buy my own freedom. I got into college with a combination of scholarships and the money I'd saved. I chose to become an accountant. It felt practical, safe. I found comfort in numbers. They were honest. They didn't try to guilt you. A credit was a credit. A debit was a debit. My parents were proud, but only because it was a status symbol they could use. Our daughter, Clara, she handles the books for major corporations, my mom would boast to her friends. Then, in a whisper to me, she'd add, "Since you're doing so well, you can cover dinner tonight, can't you?" I always did. At 25, I was living in a tiny apartment, surviving on ramen noodles, but I was the one paying for their fancy steak dinners. I was still trying to pay off the emotional mortgage of my upbringing. Then, Grandma Eleanor fell ill. It was brutally fast. One month she was teaching me how to repoint the brick walkway. The next she was frail and confined to a hospital bed. I was there every single day. My parents visited twice. Both times they complained about the cost of the hospital parking garage. When she passed, it felt like the sky had fallen. The one safe harbor I had ever known was gone. The funeral was a hazy memory of black dresses and feigned sorrow. My parents were performatively distraught, accepting sympathies with theatrical sighs. I stood at the back, my eyes dry, my heart numb. My real goodbye had been in the quiet of her hospital room. I didn't need to put on a show for an audience. Then came the day we met with her lawyer, a man named Mr. Davies, to read the will. We all sat in his stuffy, wood-paneled office. My father fidgeted, tapping his foot impatiently. My mother was already whispering about the kitchen remodel they were planning. They were her only child. They assumed they were getting it all. Mr. Davies cleared his throat and began. "To my son, Robert, and his wife, Judith," he read, "I leave the sum of $175,000. My parents both let out a sharp gasp. Their eyes met, wide with shock and delight. It was a fortune to them. They smiled. My father leaned back, a smug, satisfied look on his face. "And," Mr. Davies continued, "to my granddaughter, Clara Evans." He paused. My parents glanced at me, a flicker of confusion in their eyes. Why would I be getting anything? "I leave the remainder of my liquid assets, totaling $60,000, and I leave my property at 112 Oak Street, including the house and all its contents." The office fell completely silent. My father shot up from his chair. "What? The house?" Mr. Davies said, unflustered. Mrs. Evans left the house to Clara. "That has to be a mistake," my mother snapped. "We're her children. Clara is she's the grandchild. She can't possibly manage that property. It's enormous." "The will is perfectly clear," the lawyer stated. He slid a set of old brass keys across the polished desk toward me. I picked them up. The metal felt cool and heavy in my palm. The key to the jasmine-scented porch, the key to the workshop, the key to the only place I'd ever felt truly loved. My father whirled on me, his face turning a blotchy red. "You can't take this, Clara. You have no idea what home ownership entails. It's a money pit, a burden." "I can handle it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We'll swap," my mother said, her voice suddenly slick. "You take the cash, we'll take the house. It makes more sense. You can buy a nice little condo for yourself." "No," I said. It was the first time in my life I had ever said no to them about anything involving money. "I'm keeping the house." They didn't talk to me for a month after that. But they had their money, $175,000. It was more cash than they'd ever had at one time, and they burned through it. They bought 2 brand new SUVs. They took a cruise to the Caribbean. They had their kitchen redone with gaudy granite countertops. They ate out at the most expensive restaurants in town almost every night. For a brief period, they felt rich. They acted powerful. In the meantime, I moved into Eleanor's house. It felt vast and empty at first, but it was mine. I walked on the floorboards I had helped her sand. I watered the rose bushes I had helped her prune. I patched the leaky faucet under the kitchen sink. I felt her spirit in the walls. I felt the peace slowly return. I poured my life into that house. I funneled my salary into updating the electrical systems. I painted the dark-paneled rooms a warm, creamy white. I converted one of the spare bedrooms into my home office. For 3 years, it was my sanctuary. I was 28. I owned a home outright that was worth nearly $1 million in a booming market. I had 0 debt. I was free, or so I believed. I should have known my parents' newfound wealth was built on sand. They only knew how to spend, not how to build. 3 years to the month after the funeral, the phone calls began. "Claire, honey," my mom's voice crooned one evening, "we've hit a little tight spot. The $175,000 was gone, every last cent. And now their eyes were turning to me. They were turning to my house. They didn't see a home. They saw a resource, and they felt entitled to it. Grief is a powerful force, but greed is a relentless one. For my parents, the latter had long since eclipsed the former. Their descent from proud homeowners to desperate squatters was shockingly swift. It began with a string of familiar complaints. My father was laid off from his logistics job. He claimed it was his age, but I'd heard through the grapevine it was because he was always late. My mother's hours at the department store were reduced. They were sinking fast in the debt they'd accumulated, living a lifestyle they couldn't afford with Eleanor's money. The new SUVs were repossessed. The credit cards were all maxed out. Then came the Sunday dinner invitation. I'd invited them over, still trying to play the part of the good daughter. I made a roast chicken, just like Eleanor used to. We sat in her beautiful dining room as the afternoon sun streamed through the windows I had just washed, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. My father scanned the room, not with admiration, but with a predatory hunger. "This place is far too big for one person," he said, chewing his food with his mouth open. "It's wasteful, all these extra rooms. Meanwhile, we're struggling to keep the lights on in that tiny rental of ours." I tightened my grip on my fork. "I use the rooms, Dad. I have my office, and there's the guest room." "Guest room?" My mother let out a sharp, brittle laugh. "Whoever comes to visit you, Clara, you're always at the office." She took a long gulp of the expensive wine I had bought for the occasion. "Actually," she said, placing her glass down with a definitive click, "we need to discuss something with you. We're in trouble, Claire. Real trouble." That familiar knot of dread tightened in my stomach. The bill was coming due. "We're about to lose our apartment," she said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "The landlord is evicting us. We can't make rent." I put my fork down. "I thought you were saving money." My father slammed his fist on the table, making the plates jump. "Things came up. Life is complicated. You wouldn't get it. You've had everything just handed to you." Handed to me. I worked 60-hour weeks. I maintained this entire property with my own 2 hands, but I kept my mouth shut. "We need a place to stay," my mother pleaded, her voice becoming soft and whiny. "Just for a short time, just until we can get our feet back under us. We can sell off some things, pay down our debts, and then we'll be out of your hair before you know it." I looked from one face to the other. Every alarm bell in my body was screaming, "Don't do it. Don't open that door. They'll never leave." But they were my parents. The childhood programming was buried deep. Be thankful. You owe them. "Okay," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "You can use the guest suite for 3 months. That's it." "Oh, thank you, baby." My mother rushed to my side and enveloped me in a hug that felt like a cage door slamming shut. They moved in the following weekend. I was expecting a few suitcases, maybe a couple of boxes. They showed up with a U-Haul. "What is all of this?" I asked, standing dumbfounded in the driveway as my father wrestled a monstrous, overstuffed recliner down the ramp. "We can't just abandon our entire lives, Clara," he grunted, sweating. "Where do you want this monstrosity?" "In the garage," I said firmly. "The guest suite is already furnished." "Don't be ridiculous," he scoffed. "This is my chair. I need it for watching the games. We'll just put it in the main living room." "No, I said. My living room is arranged the way I like it. He completely ignored me, shouldering past me and dragging the hideous, mustard-yellow chair into my beautifully curated living room. He unceremoniously shoved my elegant armchair to the side and positioned his throne directly in front of the television. There, he declared, wiping his hands on his pants. Much better. It was an occupation. Within a week, the house no longer felt like mine. They colonized the kitchen. My mother completely reorganized my pantry because, as she put it, my system made no logical sense. I'd come home from a long day at work to find my spices in different cupboards, my pots and pans stacked in a precarious, jumbled mess, and a layer of grease on the stovetop I always kept pristine. I made you dinner, she'd announced, gesturing to some congealed, greasy casserole. You should be grateful. You work so hard. But the cleanup was never part of the deal. The sink would be piled high with dirty dishes. If I brought it up, she'd sigh dramatically. Well, I cooked, Clara. The least you can do is the dishes. We're a team. It wasn't a team. It was a hostile takeover. My father annexed the living room. The television was on from the moment he woke up until he went to bed, blasting political commentary or football games at a deafening volume. If I wanted a moment of peace to read, I had to hide in my bedroom. He started parking his beat-up truck right in the middle of the driveway, completely blocking my car. Every single morning, I had to go knock on their bedroom door to ask him to move it so I could get to work. You leave so early, he'd complain, squinting at the clock. It was 7:30 a.m. Can't you just take the bus? Gas is a fortune. I'm going to work, Dad, to pay for the house you're living in. He'd just wave his hand dismissively. You make plenty of money. You need to stop being such a penny pincher. You're turning into your grandmother. He meant it as an insult. I chose to take it as the highest compliment. The 3 months came and went. They made no move to leave. Every time I tried to bring up the deadline, a new crisis would magically appear. My sciatica is acting up something fierce. I can't possibly pack boxes right now, my mother would say. The rental market is terrible. We can't find anything affordable, my dad would claim. Why are you so eager to throw us out on the street? They would ask in unison. Don't you love your family, after everything we sacrificed for you? 6 months crawled by, then a full year. I started deliberately working late just to minimize my time at home. I'd sit in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes, trying to summon the emotional fortitude to walk through my own front door. Then came the Europe scheme. It was a Tuesday night. I walked in, bone-tired, to the smell of burnt garlic. My parents were seated at the dining room table, surrounded by glossy travel brochures. Clara, come see. My mother was practically glowing, looking more animated than I'd seen her in years. I cautiously approached. The brochures were for Italy, Tuscany, Rome, the Amalfi Coast. What's all this? I asked. We're going to Italy, my father announced, leaning back in his chair with an air of grandeur. We've always dreamed of going. Your mother deserves a nice vacation. She's been under so much stress. I stared at them, utterly baffled. How? You told me last week you didn't have enough money for groceries. My father's expression hardened. Well, obviously, that's where you come in. I physically took a step back. Me? I'm not paying for you to go to Italy. No, not with your money directly, my mother said in a soothing voice. We were talking to a financial planner. Well, your Uncle Barry, but he's good with money. And he said you have a huge amount of equity built up in this house. A lot. My blood ran cold. You want me to take out a loan against my house? I asked, my voice shaking. It's just a small one, my father interjected. 40,000. That'll cover the trip and give us a little nest egg to find our own place when we get back. It's an investment in our future, Clara. With that cushion, we can finally get out of your hair for good." It was a lie. I knew, with every fiber of my being, that it was a lie. But the look in their eyes, my mother's were welling up with tears. "Please, Claire, we're not getting any younger. We might not have many good years left. Don't you want us to have just one nice memory? We gave up so much for you." The guilt. It was a physical force pressing down on my chest. I was cornered. If I said no, I was the monster, the ungrateful child hoarding her inheritance while her poor, aging parents suffered. If I said yes, maybe, just maybe, this would be the final payment, the last invoice. "If I do this," I whispered, "you move out the day you get back. No more excuses." "We swear on our lives," my mother said, clapping her hands together. "Oh, thank you. You really are a good daughter, finally." I went to the bank the next day and signed the papers for a home equity line of credit. I felt nauseous. I transferred the $40,000 to their account. They didn't even say thank you again. They just started looking at designer luggage online. For the next 2 weeks, the house was filled with their manic excitement. They bought new outfits, new cameras. They chattered endlessly about the food they would eat and the wine they would drink. They never once asked me about my day. They never once asked if I wanted to join them. They just took. The day I drove them to the airport was a massive relief. They sat in the back seat like excited teenagers. "Don't forget to water my petunias," my mother said as we pulled up to the departure's curb. She had planted a patch of garish flowers in the middle of my jasmine bed. "And make sure you collect the mail," my father added. "We're expecting a few checks." They scrambled out. My father hauled their brand new oversized suitcases from the trunk. "Bye, Clara," my mother called, waving distractedly without looking at me. "See you in 3 weeks," my father grunted. They vanished through the sliding glass doors, never looking back. I drove home in absolute silence. When I walked into the house, it was quiet. For the first time in over a year, it was truly, blissfully quiet. I walked inside. The living room was a disaster zone. My father's recliner sat there like a monument to his entitlement. There were dirty mugs on the coffee table, but they were gone. I sank onto my own sofa, the one they had shoved into a corner, and I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for a year. I thought the worst was over. I thought I had just purchased my freedom for $40,000. I thought they would return, move out, and we could go back to being distant, cordial relatives. I was so wrong. I didn't realize it then, but the real betrayal hadn't even started. That night, I was trying to reclaim my kitchen, scrubbing at the layers of grease they'd left on the stove. The house felt huge and wonderfully empty. And then the phone rang. The caller ID showed Dad's cell. They must be on their layover in Atlanta, I thought. Maybe they left something behind. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and answered. "Hello?" I said. There was no reply, just a faint, crackling static. "Dad?" Then I heard it, the unmistakable background noise of an airport lounge, clinking glasses, the low hum of conversations, and then his voice, clear as day. He hadn't ended the call. The phone must have been in his pocket or lying face up on the bar. I was about to hang up. I didn't want to eavesdrop, but then he said my name. "Clara is so unbelievably gullible," my father sneered. It was a tone I'd never heard him use, not to my face. It was dripping with contempt, cruel. I froze, my thumb hovering over the red end call button. Does she really think we're moving out when we get back? My mother's voice chimed in. She was laughing, a high, sharp, ugly laugh. "She's delusional." "She's a burden," my father said. "Always has been. but she's a useful one. I literally stopped breathing. I pressed the phone harder against my ear. Vanessa said if we establish residency and stay there long enough, she legally can't kick us out, my father continued. Something about squatters' rights. Plus, I found the deed. The one she keeps in that little safe in her office. My blood turned to ice. They had gone through my safe. By this time next year, my father said, his words slurring slightly from the wine, that deed is going to have our names on it. We just have to break her down a bit more. She's weak. She's desperate for our approval. It's pathetic. Really. Pathetic, my mother echoed. Cheers to Italy, and cheers to our new retirement home. I heard the clink of glasses. To the Evans family estate, my father laughed. I stood there, in the kitchen my grandmother had lovingly built. The kitchen my salary was paying for. They weren't just inconsiderate houseguests. They were predators. They were actively plotting to steal my home, using my own sense of guilt and duty as their primary weapon. I looked at the phone. I looked at the end call icon. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Something inside me snapped, but it wasn't breaking. It was setting, like a bone that had been dislocated for years, finally popping back into its socket with a painful, clarifying jolt. I didn't hang up. I listened for another full minute as they mocked me, as they planned my ruin, and then, with absolute quiet, I ended the call. I placed the phone on the counter. I looked around the room. I looked at my father's ugly yellow chair. I looked at my mother's disorganized spices. No, I whispered to the empty house. They wanted a war. They wanted to play dirty. They had absolutely no idea who they were up against. They thought they had raised a weak, pathetic girl who was desperate for their love. But they forgot who had really raised me. Eleanor had raised me. And Eleanor didn't raise victims. She raised builders. And I was about to deconstruct their entire world. I stood in the kitchen for what felt like an hour. The phone screen was black. The silence in the house was now deafening. Just 10 minutes ago, I was a daughter, trying to do the right thing by her parents. I was a daughter drowning in guilt for having a beautiful home while they claimed to struggle. I was a daughter who had just indebted herself for $40,000 to fund their vacation. Now, I was something entirely different. I let the words play on a loop in my mind. She's a burden, always has been, pathetic. That deed will have our names on it. He hadn't said these things in the heat of an argument. He'd said them coolly, calmly, while sipping wine paid for by me. He'd said them to make my mother laugh, and she had laughed. That was the shard of glass in my heart. My mother, who had hugged me and called me a good daughter just hours before, had laughed at the idea of robbing me. I walked into the living room and stared at my father's recliner. It looked like a fungal growth in the middle of my clean space. I looked at the coffee table, at the permanent rings his mugs had left on the wood. He never used a coaster. He never respected the furniture or the house because he didn't respect me. I sank to the floor. I braced myself for the tears, for the wave of grief, but my eyes were bone dry. In place of sadness, there was a strange, arctic clarity. It was like a fever I'd been suffering from my entire life had finally broken. For 28 years, I'd been trying to earn their love. I thought if I was just good enough, quiet enough, generous enough, they would finally see me, not the balance sheet. I thought the debt I owed them for my own existence would one day be paid in full. But tonight, I had learned the truth. The debt itself was a fiction. There was no balance to clear. They were never, ever going to love me. To them, I wasn't a daughter. I was an asset, a resource to be exploited until it ran dry. They called me a burden, but as I sat there, surrounded by their mess, their clutter, I realized the truth. I wasn't the burden. They were. They were heavy and expensive and cruel. I pushed myself up and walked to the hallway mirror. I looked at my reflection. I looked exhausted. I had permanent dark circles under my eyes from working 60-hour weeks to support their lifestyle. I looked 10 years older than 28. "No more," I said to the woman in the mirror. My voice was rock steady. I went to the safe in my office and spun the combination dial. Click, click, click. The heavy steel door swung open. My heart pounded. I found that deed. I reached inside. The papers were all there, but they'd been disturbed. The large manila envelope that held the deed to Eleanor's house had a small tear in the corner. He had been in here. He had violated my most private space, held the proof of my ownership in his hands, and plotted how to take it from me. I pulled the deed out, holding it carefully. It was just a piece of paper, but it was a symbol of everything Grandma Eleanor had taught me: independence, security, self-worth. "Never let anyone take what you've earned, Claire," she'd once told me. I had let them take so much already: my money, my peace, my space. But they were not taking this house. I went back to the kitchen and brewed a pot of strong black coffee. It was 9 p.m. Sleep was not on the agenda. I grabbed a legal pad and a pen and sat down at the table. I wrote down everything I could remember from the call, word for word. I noted the date and the time. "Dad, she's a burden. Mom, keep up the guilt, she's weak. Plan, claim squatters' rights, forge the deed." Seeing it written down made it real. It wasn't just a painful memory. It was evidence. It was a declaration of war. They were banking on my weakness. They were counting on me to be the same little girl who cried when they yelled at her for wasting electricity. They had made a fatal miscalculation. They had forgotten my profession. I was an accountant. I knew how to manage assets. I knew how to identify and cut liabilities. And my parents were a toxic, non-performing asset. It was time for liquidation. I looked at the calendar on the fridge. They were in Italy for 21 days, 3 weeks. That was my window of opportunity. I didn't need to have a screaming match. I didn't need to beg them to leave. I just needed to vanish. By the time the sun started to rise, the plan was fully formed. I wasn't just going to evict them. I was going to remove myself from the equation entirely. I was going to sell the house. The thought was radical. I loved this house. I loved the jasmine, the workshop, the porch. But it was tainted now. Their greedy energy was embedded in the walls. If I stayed, they would always know where to find me. They'd come back from Italy and bang on the door, armed with lawyers and guilt trips. I needed a clean slate, a total reset. I drank the last of the coffee as the sun cast a pale gray light over the garden. "Goodbye, Grandma," I whispered. "I'm so sorry, but I have to save myself." I felt a strange warmth spread through my chest, and I knew she would have understood. She didn't leave me the house so I could become a prisoner in it. She left me the house so I could be free. And to be truly free, I had to let it go. I picked up my phone. It was 8 a.m. The business world was waking up. My first call was to my boss. "I'm taking all my vacation time," I told him, "starting now." I had 3 weeks of paid leave saved up. I never took vacations. My boss was surprised, but he didn't protest. "Is everything all right, Clara?" he asked. "Perfectly," I said. "I just have some personal property matters to attend to." Next, I called Vanessa Croft. Vanessa was a real estate attorney I'd met at a professional seminar. She was brilliant, sharp-tongued, and had a reputation for not suffering fools. She was not my parents' lawyer. My father had been bluffing, or had spoken to some ambulance-chasing hack. Vanessa answered on the second ring. Vanessa Croft. Vanessa, it's Clara Evans. I have a situation and I need to understand my rights. I laid out the entire story, the will, letting them move in, the $40,000 loan, the phone call. I kept my voice even, but she must have heard the steel in it. When I mentioned squatters' rights, Vanessa let out a dismissive snort. They're guests, Clara, guests who have massively overstayed their welcome. Have they ever paid you rent? No. Signed a lease? No. Contributed to utilities or taxes? No. I paid for everything. Then they are not tenants, Vanessa stated firmly. They are licensees. You can revoke your permission for them to be on the property at any time. They mentioned getting their names on the deed, I said. They can't, she replied. Not without you signing it over. And you're not going to do that. What do you want to do? I want to sell the house while they're gone. I want the sale closed before their flight lands in 3 weeks. There was a brief pause on her end. That's an aggressive timeline, Vanessa said, but not impossible. If you sell the property, their status as your guests is terminated immediately. The new owners have a right to possession. It's the cleanest way to do this. Can I do that legally, with all their belongings still inside? It's your house, Clara. You have the right to sell it. As for their possessions, you have a duty of care. You can't just set them on fire on the lawn, but you can pack them and place them in storage. You just have to notify them of their location. Okay, I said, a massive weight lifting from my shoulders. I'll do it. I'll start drafting the necessary sale documents, Vanessa said. You go find a buyer. And Clara? Yes? Document everything. Take pictures of the house as it is now. Keep receipts for every dime you spend moving their things. Protect yourself. I will. Thank you, Vanessa. I hung up. Step 1 complete. Step 2, sell the house. I couldn't just put a for sale sign on the lawn. The neighbors would gossip. My aunt lived just 3 streets over. The news would get back to my parents in hours. If they found out, they'd be on the next flight home. They would barricade themselves in the living room and make a scene, scaring off any potential buyers. I had to be a ghost. I called Daniel Reed. Daniel was a real estate agent I knew from college who now specialized in high-end, off-market sales. Clara Evans, it's been ages, he answered cheerfully. I need to sell my house, Daniel, and I need to sell it today. He gave a nervous chuckle. Today? You mean you want to list it today? I mean, I need a cash buyer today, and we need to close in 20 days or less. No sign, no online listing. It has to be a private sale. That's a tall order, but for that house, on that street, I might have a couple of institutional investors looking for a quick flip. The price has to be fair, I said. I'm not giving it away, but I am willing to trade a premium for speed and discretion. Let me make some calls, Daniel said. Give me 2 hours. I used those 2 hours productively. I didn't pace, I didn't second guess. I started in the living room, taking photos of everything with my phone, just as Vanessa had instructed. I documented my father's chair, the mess they'd left, every detail. Then I got to work. I went to the garage and started assembling moving boxes. I began with the easy stuff, my books, my clothes, my personal belongings. At 11:30 a.m. sharp, Daniel called back. I have 2 cash offers for you, he said. I paused, tape gun in hand. Already? Like I said, the market's hot and people love Oak Street. Here they are. Tell me. Offer 1 is from a developer. They want to tear it down and build 2 modern farmhouse-style homes. They're offering $850,000. Cash. They can close in 10 days. My gut clenched. Tear down Eleanor's house? Destroy her garden? No, I said immediately. What's the other offer? Offer 2 is from a young couple from Seattle. They're relocating for work. They drove by the house a month ago and fell in love with it. They want to preserve the character, keep the garden. And the price? $980,000. They can close in 18 days. They have the cash wired and ready to go. $980,000. It was nearly $1 million. It was enough to start over completely anywhere I wanted. It was enough to disappear. The closing date, I said. It has to be ironclad. 18 days. My parents get back on day 21. I'll write it into the contract as time is of the essence, Daniel said. Possession upon closing. We can make this happen, Clara. Do it, I said. I accept. Bring the paperwork over. I hung up the phone and stood in the middle of my kitchen. It was really happening. I looked at the cluttered counter where my mother's spices were a chaotic mess. I wasn't just selling a house. I was selling my prison. I was selling the cage they had so carefully constructed around me. Now for the hard part. Packing up my parents' lives. I went online and rented a 10 by 15 storage unit in a facility 2 towns over. I prepaid for 6 months. It was more than generous. It was more than they deserved. I booked a moving company for the very next day. Pack and move, I told the scheduler. Everything in the 2 guest rooms and the main living room goes into storage. Everything else goes to my new address. I didn't have a new address yet. I'd figure that out later tonight. I spent the rest of the day sorting through their things. I went into their bathroom. Their toothbrushes sat by the sink. My mother's jar of expensive anti-aging cream, which I knew she'd charged to my credit card, was on the counter. I methodically placed it all into a box labeled Judith Robert. I didn't break a single thing. I didn't throw anything out. I was meticulous. Vanessa's words echoed in my head. Reasonable care. I was being reasonable. It was a courtesy they had never extended to me. In my father's nightstand, I found a stack of letters hidden under some old magazines. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. They were final notices from debt collectors, screaming red warnings. They had been hiding the true extent of their financial ruin from me. They had pretended the $40,000 was for a cushion, but in reality, they were completely underwater. If I hadn't overheard that call, they would have come back, manipulated me into signing over the deed, and then leveraged my home to pay off their own debts, dragging me down with them until I had nothing. I wasn't destroying their lives. I was saving my own. By nightfall, the house was a sea of cardboard boxes. I sat on the porch steps as the sun dipped below the horizon. The jasmine smelled sweet and sharp in the cool air. The sadness was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose. I had a checklist running in my head. Sign contract with Daniel. Done. Find an apartment for myself. Pack their things. Pack my things. Close bank accounts. Get a new phone number. I looked at the driveway, now blessedly empty. My parents were probably in Rome by now, eating cacio e pepe, toasting their own cleverness, laughing about their soft, gullible daughter. Let them laugh. When they returned, the locks would be different. The deed would be in a stranger's name, and their daughter, their burden, would be a ghost. I stood up and went back inside. I had work to do. The moving trucks showed up on a drizzly Wednesday morning. The weather felt fitting, a gray cleansing of the last few years. I had hired 2 separate companies with 2 separate trucks. I didn't want my belongings commingling with theirs. I didn't want any cross-contamination of energy. Truck A is for the storage unit, I told the foreman, a burly man named Gus. I handed him a detailed, highlighted list. Everything on this sheet goes to the facility in Northwood. It's all prepaid. Just unload it, lock the unit, and bring the key back to me. You got it, boss, Gus said. He glanced down the list, which included the hideous recliner, the stained coffee table, the boxes of their clothes, and the dusty treadmill my father had bought on a whim and used exactly once. "Truck B," I said, turning to the other crew, "is going to Lakewood." Lakewood was a city about 2 hours south. It was pleasant, quiet, and far enough away that I wouldn't run into my parents at the grocery store, but close enough that I didn't feel like a fugitive. I watched them work, a strange sense of detachment washing over me as my home was systematically dismantled. When they carried my father's recliner out the front door, I felt a literal weight lift from my shoulders. That chair had been a symbol of his occupation, his throne, from which he barked orders and complained about the world. Now, it was just an ugly piece of furniture being unceremoniously shoved into the back of a truck. I felt no guilt. I checked my own pulse. Steady as a rock. I'd spent the last 3 days deep cleaning the house, not for them, but for the new owners, the young couple from Seattle. They seemed so hopeful. They deserved a fresh start. I wanted to scrub every last trace of my parents' negative energy from the walls. In the kitchen, the movers were carefully wrapping my pots and pans. "Be careful with that cast iron skillet," I said. It was my grandmother's. "We'll wrap it twice, ma'am," a young mover replied kindly. I went to the refrigerator and started purging. The half-eaten jar of pickles my dad loved, the cheap light beer, the block of moldy cheddar my mom had forgotten in the back. Emptying the fridge felt like clearing out the clutter in my own mind. Each item that landed in the trash bag was a bad memory being discarded. By mid-afternoon, the house was eerily empty. The rooms echoed with every footstep. I walked through the halls, admiring the gleaming hardwood floors I had polished one last time. In the garage, my own car was packed with my absolute essentials: my laptop, personal documents, and the signed lease for the new townhouse I'd rented in Lakewood. I had one final errand to run before leaving town for good. I drove to my bank and sat down with a teller named Maria, who had known me since I opened my first account. "I need to close all my accounts," I told her. Maria's eyebrows shot up. "All of them? Your checking, your savings, the joint account?" "Close them all," I confirmed. "I'd like the balances in cashier's checks, and I need to remove myself as an authorized user on the credit card I gave my mother." "Okay," Maria said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "The joint account only has $32 in it." I laughed. Of course it did. "That's fine. Close it. And the credit card. It has a balance of just over $3,000. My mother's pre-Italy shopping spree." "Of course." "Pay it off from my savings," I instructed, the words tasting bitter. It was $3,000 of my hard-earned money, gone. "Pay it off and then cancel the card immediately. Please note that it was closed by consumer request." "Done," Maria said, handing me the checks. I tucked them into my purse, feeling lighter. My next stop was the post office, where I arranged to have my mail forwarded to a new P.O. box in Lakewood. I didn't want them having my physical address. Not yet. Then, the cell phone store. "I need a new phone number," I told the clerk. "Do you want to port your old one over?" he asked. "No," I said. "A new number, a new plan, a new start." I kept my old phone, though. I didn't trade it in. It was now sitting in my purse, powered off. I needed it for one final task. I needed to know when they landed. I needed confirmation that the plan had worked. I drove back to the house one last time. The sun was beginning to set, the rain had stopped, and the air was clean. I stood on the porch, the scent of jasmine heavy in the air. "I'm sorry, Grandma," I whispered again. A wave of sadness washed over me. This was the only home that had ever felt like a home. This was where I learned I had value. But then I heard her voice in my memory. A home is for living, Claire. Money is for freedom. I wasn't losing the lesson. I was finally living it. The house was just bricks and mortar. The strength she gave me, that was inside me. I walked down the steps and plucked a single sprig of jasmine, tucking it into my pocket. I left the new keys on the kitchen counter, just as Daniel, the realtor, had instructed. The new owners were doing their final walkthrough in the morning, and the sale would close electronically at noon. I walked out the front door and locked it behind me. I did not look back. I got in my car and drove away. I drove past my old high school. I drove past the grocery store where my mother used to argue over expired coupons. I drove past the industrial park where my father used to work. I merged onto the highway, cranked up the radio, and sang along at the top of my lungs to a song I'd never heard before. 2 hours later, I pulled into Lakewood. My new townhouse was smaller than the house, but it was modern and bright, with clean lines and huge windows. It had no history. I started unpacking my boxes. I put Eleanor's cast iron skillet on the new stove. I arranged my books on the built-in shelves. That night, I slept on an air mattress on the floor, as my bed hadn't been delivered yet. It was the most peaceful night's sleep I'd had in years. I woke up the next morning to an email from Daniel. The subject line was simple: closed. The body of the email read, "Congratulations, Clara. The wire transfer has been initiated. You have officially sold. The funds will be in your new account by end of business day." I stared at the screen. $980,000. I was free. I spent the next 18 days building my new life. I explored my new neighborhood. I found a favorite coffee shop. I bought new furniture. I didn't turn on my old phone. It stayed in a drawer, silent. I was waiting. Day 21 arrived on a Sunday. I woke up with a knot of anticipation in my stomach. I knew their flight itinerary by heart. They were scheduled to land at the Columbus airport at 2 p.m. By 3:30, they'd be in a taxi heading home, or so they believed. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window of my new living room. I pictured them at the airport, tanned and smug. My mother would be wearing some new designer scarf she'd bought in Rome. My father would be complaining about the flight. They'd be tired, but self-satisfied, mentally preparing their speeches for how they were going to corner me that evening. "Clara, we need to have a talk about the deed. Clara, we've decided to stay for good." I checked the clock. 3:45 p.m. They should be pulling up to the house right about now. I retrieved my old phone from the drawer and powered it on. It buzzed to life with a flurry of spam notifications, which I ignored. I wasn't using it to communicate. I was using it as a periscope to watch the beautiful disaster I had orchestrated. I had asked my old neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a sweet but notoriously nosy woman, to keep an eye out. I'd told her I was moving and selling, but spared her the drama. "My parents might be a bit confused when they get back," I'd said. "Could you just let me know if there's any commotion?" Mrs. Gable, who lived for drama, had agreed with relish. At 4:02 p.m., my new phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Gable. "They're here." My heart started to pound. Mrs. Gable. "Taxi just dropped them off. They have a mountain of luggage. Your dad looks well fed. LOL. I stared at the message. Mrs. Gable. "They're at the front door. Your mom is fumbling for her keys." I closed my eyes, visualizing the scene. The heavy oak door, the antique brass lock, the key my mother had carried for over a year. Mrs. Gable. "She's trying the key. It's not working. Now your father is trying. He's rattling the doorknob." I'd had the locks changed the day I moved my things out. Or rather, the new owners, a lovely couple named Sarah and Mark, had installed a smart lock keypad as soon as they took possession. My parents' old-fashioned key was now useless. Mrs. Gable. "They're knocking now. Loudly. No one is answering. Your dad just kicked the bottom of the door. He looks furious. I took a slow sip of my tea. My hands were shaking, not with fear, but with a surge of adrenaline. Mrs. Gable. Oh dear, your dad is shouting now. He's going around the side toward the garden gate, trying to get in the back. The back gate was secured with a new, heavy-duty padlock. I'd made sure of it myself. Mrs. Gable. He's back at the front. His face is beet red. Your mom is crying. She's sitting on one of their suitcases on the sidewalk. And then it happened. My old phone, lying on the table, lit up. Incoming call, Mom's cell. I watched it flash, again and again. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. It immediately started ringing again. Incoming call, Dad's cell. He called 3 times in a row. I waited. Mrs. Gable. A police car just drove past, slowed down, then kept going. Your dad is yelling into his phone. I think he's leaving you a very angry message. I waited another 5 minutes. The phone went quiet. A notification appeared. New voicemail. I took a deep breath and hit play, putting it on speaker. My father's voice, raw and distorted with rage, filled my quiet, peaceful apartment. Clara, pick up the damn phone. What the hell is going on? The key doesn't work. There's some kind of keypad on the door. We can't get in. He paused, taking a ragged breath. I could hear traffic in the background. Where are you? Did you change the locks on us? Is this some kind of petty joke? Your mother is exhausted from the flight. She needs to use the restroom. Get your butt back here and open this door right now. The message ended. He still didn't get it. He thought I was just being difficult. He thought I was inside, ignoring them. He could not even conceive of a reality where I had taken decisive action. 10 minutes later, a new voicemail, this time from my mother. Her voice was a high-pitched, panicked whine. Claire, honey, please pick up. We're scared. I think someone's in the house. I saw a shadow move past the window. It's not you. Who is in our house? Clara, did you rent it out? You can't do that. We live here. Our house. She still called it our house. Then the final voicemail. This one came 20 minutes later. It was my father again. His voice was lower now, laced with a chilling menace. I just spoke to that nosy old bat across the street. Gable. She said you moved. She said you sold the house. There was a long, stunned silence. I could hear the wind whistling into the phone's microphone. You sold it without our permission? Who the hell do you think you are? That was a family asset. You ungrateful little... You sold our home from under us while we were gone? He let out a short, incredulous laugh. A burden did this? Really? You think you're so smart. You are in for a world of pain, little girl. You abandoned your parents. You stole our equity. You can expect to hear from our lawyer, Clara. You can expect to hear from the police. I will find you, and I will take every last cent you have. Click. I sat in the silence, his threat echoing in the room. Expect a lawyer. I reached for the accordion file Vanessa Croft had prepared for me. Inside was a copy of the new deed, the sale contract, the legal proof of my sole ownership, the receipts for the prepaid storage unit, and the bank statement showing I'd paid off my mother's credit card. I wasn't afraid of his lawyer. I glanced at one last text from Mrs. Gable. Mrs. Gable, they're getting into an Uber with all their bags. Your dad just kicked over my recycling bin on his way out. They're gone. They were gone, heading to some cheap motel probably, a motel they'd have to pay for themselves. They'd have to unpack their brand new suitcases in a cramped, stale room and finally come to terms with the fact that their safety net, my home, my life, was gone. I powered down the old phone, popped out the SIM card, walked to the kitchen, and dropped the tiny chip into the garbage disposal. I flipped the switch. A violent, grinding crunch. The connection was severed. I walked out onto my small balcony. The sun was finally breaking through the clouds. I wasn't a victim. I was a woman with a plan, a new home, and nearly $1 million in the bank. But I knew this wasn't over. My father was a bully, and bullies don't just give up. They escalate. He said he would find me. Let him try. I was ready. I went to my laptop and opened a saved email draft addressed to my parents. It contained only one thing: the address of the storage facility where their worldly possessions now sat. I added a single line to the email. I heard you, on the phone, 3 weeks ago. You forgot to hang up. I hovered the cursor over the send button. No, not yet. Sending it now would give them an explanation. It would give them a sliver of closure. I wasn't ready to give them anything. I wanted them to sit in that grimy motel room and wonder. I wanted them to feel the raw confusion and powerlessness they had made me feel my entire life. I closed the laptop. I would tell them tomorrow. Tonight, I was going to order a pepperoni pizza, eat it on the floor of my new living room, and bask in the profound silence of a home that was finally, irrevocably, 100% mine. But that profound silence didn't last. The next morning, my new phone rang with an unfamiliar number. It had a Columbus area code, but not one I recognized. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. "Is this Clara Evans?" a man's voice asked. It was formal, stern. "Yes, this is she. This is Officer Dempsey with the Columbus Police Department. We've received a formal complaint filed by a Robert Evans regarding grand theft and a possible case of elder abuse. We need to ask you a few questions." My knuckles went wide around the phone. Elder abuse? Theft? My father wasn't just threatening lawyers. He was trying to have me arrested. "I'm listening," I said, keeping my voice as steady as possible. "Mr. Evans alleges that you sold his home without his consent and have stolen personal property valued at approximately $50,000. He also claims you have abandoned him and his wife, and they are now homeless." I took a slow, deliberate breath. "Officer," I began, "I was the sole legal owner of that property. I have the deed and the bill of sale to prove it. My parents were non-paying guests in my home, and I have placed all of their property, every last item, in a secure, prepaid storage unit. I have stolen nothing." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You have documentation to support these claims?" the officer asked. His tone had shifted, becoming less accusatory and more inquisitive. "I have everything," I said. "I can email it to your precinct right now, along with the contact information for my attorney, Vanessa Croft." "Please do," he said. "If what you're saying is accurate, this sounds like a civil dispute, not a criminal matter, but we are required to follow up on the complaint." "I understand," I replied. "I'm sending the email as we speak." I hung up, and only then did my hands begin to shake. He had actually called the police on me. He was willing to see his own daughter in handcuffs to get what he wanted. I immediately forwarded the entire file to the police department. Then I called Vanessa. "It's starting," I told her. "Let them come," Vanessa said, her voice calm and confident. "We're ready." I hung up and stared out the window. The fear was already being replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He wanted a war. He wanted to scorch the earth. Fine. I picked up my phone. I was done hiding. I sent the email to my parents with the storage unit information, but I changed the message. Instead of a simple explanation, I wrote, "If you want to talk, meet me tomorrow at 10 a.m. The Briar Patch Cafe in Lakewood. Come alone." It was a risk inviting them into my new city, but I needed to see their faces. I needed to say the words out loud, not from behind a screen. I needed to end this. I hit send. The game was up. The final reckoning was about to begin. I was at the Briar Patch Cafe 15 minutes early. I picked a table right in the middle of the room. I wanted an audience. I ordered a black coffee and waited. At 10:05 a.m., they walked in. They looked wrecked. My father was wearing the same wrinkled shirt he'd probably been wearing for 2 days. His face was puffy and red. My mother looked frail and diminished, her eyes darting nervously around the cafe. She wasn't wearing her new Italian scarf. They spotted me. My father marched over, yanking a chair out with a loud, scraping sound that made half the room turn to look. "You've got a hell of a lot of nerve," he hissed, slamming his palms on the table. "Sitting here enjoying your coffee while your parents are living in a motel." My mother sank into her chair. Her eyes were wet and pleading. "Claire, why? Why would you do this to us? We're your family." "I sold my house," I said, my voice calm and level. "It was mine to sell." "It was our nest egg," my father shouted. A waitress started to approach, but I gave her a small shake of my head and she backed away. "We spent our lives raising you. You owed us that house." "I don't owe you anything," I said. "You're a thief," he spat. "I'm suing you. I'm going to tell everyone, the whole family, what a despicable, ungrateful daughter you are. You're just selfish." "I'm not selfish," I said. I reached into my purse and pulled out my old phone. I had kept the audio file. "I'm informed." "What?" my mother asked, confused. I placed the phone on the table between us and pressed play. The audio was tinny, but the words were crystal clear. The ambient noise of the cafe seemed to melt away as their own voices filled the air. "She's a burden. Always has been." My father's face went slack. His ruddy complexion turned a pasty white. His mouth fell open, but nothing came out. "Just push a little. She'll sign. By next year, that deed will have our names on it." My mother let out a small, strangled gasp and covered her mouth with her hand. "She's weak. She's desperate for our approval. It's pathetic, really." I let the recording play to the very end, until the sound of their shared cruel laughter echoed from the tiny speaker. Then I hit stop. The silence that fell over our table was immense. My father stared at his coffee cup, unable to meet my eyes. My mother was crying, but for the first time, they were not manipulative tears. They were the hot, shameful tears of someone who had been caught. "You called me," I said, my voice unwavering. "3 weeks ago. You forgot to end the call." It was just the wine talking," my father stammered, his voice a weak imitation of its usual bluster. "We were just venting. We didn't mean it." "You meant every word," I said. "You meant that you don't love me. You love what I can provide for you, and I am done providing." My father tried to summon his anger, his only reliable tool. "So that's it?" he sneered, though it lacked any real heat. "You overhear one conversation and you ruin our lives? You leave us with nothing?" "I didn't leave you with nothing," I corrected him. "I paid off your $3,200 credit card bill. I paid for 6 months of storage for all your belongings. And I left you the $5,000 in cash I got from selling the furniture. It's in an envelope in the storage unit." "We're your parents," my mother wailed. "What are we supposed to do? We have nowhere to live." "You had $175,000 that Grandma left you," I pointed out. "That's gone. You know it's gone." "Then you have a problem," I said. "But it is no longer my problem. You are grown adults. You are able-bodied. Get jobs. Rent an apartment you can actually afford. Figure it out." I stood up. My legs felt solid, rooted to the ground. I looked down at them, and for the first time in my life, they looked small. They looked like two people who had made a lifetime of bad choices and were finally, at long last, facing the consequences. "I am not your retirement plan," I said. "I am not your ATM, and I am damn sure not your burden." "You can't just walk away from us," my father yelled, starting to rise from his chair. I leaned in close. "Watch me." "If you walk out that door," he threatened, his voice shaking with rage as he pointed a trembling finger at me, "don't you ever come back. You'll be dead to us." I smiled. It was a sad, tired smile, but it was real. "Dad," I said softly, "I've been dead to you for years. You just didn't notice until the money stopped." I turned my back on them. I walked toward the door. I could hear my mother calling my name, a desperate, pleading sound. "Claire! Claire! Please!" I didn't stop. I pushed open the glass door and stepped out onto the street. The air was crisp and cool. The leaves on the trees were turning vibrant shades of red and gold. I braced myself for the wave of guilt, for that familiar crushing weight in my chest. But it never came. Instead, I felt space. I felt room in my lungs to breathe. I felt the steady rhythm of my own 2 feet on the pavement. I walked to my car. I did not look back at the cafe window. I knew they were watching. I didn't care. I wasn't burning a bridge. The bridge had rotted and collapsed years ago. I was just finally acknowledging that I was standing on the other side. A year later, I was in my garden. It was a small garden, nothing like the sprawling grounds of Eleanor's Tudor, but it was mine. It was a little fenced-in patio behind my Lakewood townhouse, and I was on my knees in the dirt. The soil smelled rich and earthy. I carefully placed the root ball of a new jasmine plant into a freshly dug hole. I patted the dirt around it. "Grow strong," I whispered. My life had become quiet, but it was full. I still worked as an accountant, but I'd started my own small project. On weekends, I ran workshops at the local community center. I called it Financial Self-Defense for Women. I taught women how to read a contract, how to protect their assets, how to understand that no is a complete sentence. Last week, a young woman approached me after a session, tears in her eyes. She told me her father was trying to guilt her into co-signing a business loan for him. I took her hand. "Don't do it," I told her. "Your security is not a resource for him to gamble with." She hugged me, and for a moment, I felt like I was hugging my younger self. I never heard from my parents again. I heard through a cousin that they had moved to a retirement community in Florida. My father was working part-time doing security at the front gate. My mother was a cashier at a local supermarket. They were surviving. They were figuring it out, just as I'd told them they would have to. Inside my townhouse, on the wall of my small home office, I had 2 things framed. The first was the deed to my new home, paid for in cash. The second was a note I had found tucked away in the bottom of Grandma Eleanor's old toolbox when I was unpacking. It was written in her elegant, looping script. It read, "Claire, someday you will realize that you are stronger than any of us. When that day comes, don't be afraid to stand on your own. The foundation is the most important part of any structure, and you, my dear, are made of solid stone." I wiped the dirt from my jeans and stood up. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden light over my little jasmine plant. It was small, but it was healthy. It was alive. I sat on my back step with a glass of iced tea. For so many years I had believed their lie. I had believed I was the weight, the cost, the thing dragging them down. I took a deep breath, the air fragrant with the promise of future blossoms. I wasn't the burden. I never was. I was the foundation. And now I could finally build whatever I wanted on top